Hello my friends, welcome back. We are going to keep reading The Green Glass Sea together. We're filming in a little different location today. I thought it would be a little fun. Some sparkles, some trees in the background. The last time that we read, Suze and Dewey started getting to know each other a little bit better and decided maybe they don't hate each other like they used to think they did. Alright, so we are going to go ahead and start up with chapter 16, which starts on April 24th, Special Delivery. Dewey climbed the stairs to the apartment automatically, not even looking where she was walking. She'd had an idea for a new project while she was eating lunch in the woods, and the pieces hadn't quite come together in her mind. It would need a mainspring and a worm gear, and she thought there was one in the cigar box, but it might not be the right size, unless... She stopped in the kitchen doorway. Propped up against the napkin holder was a note that said Dewey in capital letters. Below it, lying flat, was a large brown envelope. Army, very official, with lots of rubber stamps and dates and signatures. A typed paper label said Miss D. Kerrigan, courtesy of Marjorie Gordon, P.O. Box 1663, Santa Fe, New Mexico. The note, scribbled on the back of a PX receipt, said, Dewey, a courier brought this to the lab. I didn't think you'd want to wait. T.G. Mrs. Gordon must have left it at lunchtime. Dewey sat down and carefully unwound the figure 8 of red string and paper circles that held the envelope closed, then smiled in delight. Inside was a flimsy V-mail envelope, unsealed with no postmark, but Dewey recognized the angular handwriting instantly. Papa. It wasn't a long letter, not even a whole page. Dewey read it through twice, quickly, and then a third time, taking in every word, every comma. Hello, Dews. Hope you're having an okay time at the Gordons. They're nice people. Don't stay up too late. If you go over to the house, be a good munchkin and look for my pocket knife, the one with the 3 blades and the can opener and the screwdriver. No one seems to be able to find another one. I went to see Casablanca and visited with Uncle T the other day. That was a treat. But since he's just moved, things are a bit hectic and disorganized, and he needs some help finding where things go. I may be here for longer than I'd planned. I miss you so much. OOXOXOXX, Papa. Dewey ran a finger gently over the blue ink signature from Papa's fountain pen. She sighed and carefully refolded the letter, sliding it back into its envelope. He wouldn't be back this week, but at least he'd written. Humming under her breath, Dewey took the letter back to the bedroom. She hid it under the paper lining of her dresser drawer with her Hill Pass, her important papers, then opened her cigar box to look for a good, strong spring. Chapter 17, May 8th, Tangled Like Spaghetti. It was finally spring, and Hitler was dead. Suze felt like the world was a giant jigsaw puzzle, and in the last month all the important pieces had been removed, one after the other, leaving blanks and unfamiliar names. Roosevelt, Mussolini, Hitler, all dead. It just didn't seem real. Because nothing in her life had changed much at all. She went to school, she came home. Daddy hardly ever left his lab until the middle of the night, if then, and Mom skipped supper more often than not. She missed having Mom cook. Sometimes there were leftovers in the icebox, but lately Suze had been stopping by the PX for a hamburger on the way home from school. It was either that or cold cheese sandwiches for supper. Well, that had changed a little. Last week, Dewey had made them macaroni and cheese, on the stove and everything, and it was pretty good. Better than cold sandwiches, for sure. Then, Mom came home later and made a big fuss over Dewey, how great it was she was grown up enough to make supper. Big deal, the directions were right on the box. So, on Tuesday, after school, instead of going home, Suze went to the commissary to get something she could make for supper. The store was a lot smaller and dingier than the Piggly Wiggly back home, and there wasn't a lot of choice. But she found a Chef Boyardee spaghetti. The sauce and everything was in the box, so how hard could it be? On the way home, she thought about how surprised her mom would be, what she would say. Suze smiled and juggled the box up in the air, catching it and throwing it up again. It made an interesting shooshing noise, with the long, dry noodles inside. Dewey was sitting at the kitchen table, taking something apart, as usual. Some kind of wind-up toy, a chicken or a duck, that she was prying apart with a butter knife. Hey, Suze said. Hey. Suze put the box of spaghetti down on the table and watched Dewey for a minute. She was making that weird face she did when she was thinking really hard. What are you doing? Trying to get the spring out. I wound my other one too tight and it got sprung. Oh, do you have to bust up the toy to do that? Yeah, said Dewey, but it's pretty snafu'd anyway. She held it up and Suze could see that its bill was almost rusted off and it only had one foot. It doesn't waddle anymore, it just falls over, Dewey explained. Junk, agreed Suze. I'm gonna make spaghetti tonight. You can have some too. Okay. Dewey resumed her prying. Suze waited for more of a reaction. Gratitude, excitement, something. But Dewey didn't say anything else. Suze turned on the radio. It was almost 5 o'clock, and she'd overheard Barbara tell Joyce that KRS, the only station on the hill, was going to play some top 40 music this afternoon, instead of the classical stuff they usually played. Suze didn't really mind classical, but it was hard to sing along to. Gonna take a sentimental journey, crooned Doris Day. Suze made a face. She didn't like that song too much. Too slow and sappy. She went into the living room to get the collage she was working on. She was trying to make a picture of her old life in Berkeley. Not like a drawing of her house or anything. That was kind of baby. Besides, she couldn't draw that well. The people one sent over had thrown out some old magazines, Saturday Evening Post and Ladies' Home Journal. They had big, colorful ads, and she was cutting some of them out, like paper dolls from real life. Men in hats and women with baby carriages, and the sign from a Texaco station, a Buick and a Plymouth. Sort of a street scene, but some parts were bigger than they ought to be. Her favorite so far was a tiny woman with a shopping basket filled with a giant bottle of Dr. Pepper. Suze hadn't glued anything down yet, just stuck the cutouts onto a big piece of cardboard with thumbtacks to see how they fit together. She plopped the stack of magazines onto the seat of the empty chair and propped some of the finished figures up against the napkin holder. She leafed through the pages of a Ladies' Home Journal. It was really boring to read, but it had good pictures. She cut out a full-page shiny chrome sunbeam toaster and held it up next to her people. It was the size of a building. That made her laugh, and she started to make up a comic book story to explain it while she leafed. Unbeknownst to the innocent people of Flatville, the evil scientist Linoleum had created an army of giant toasters that were now ringing the city. Linoleum laughed his evil laugh. Soon the people of Flatville would slide into the flaming slots of death, where they would burn. Suze stopped herself with a shudder. That wasn't funny. She didn't want to think about that. It was too close to what had happened to real people in Germany. Jews, like Grandma and Grandpa Weiss. There were stories in the newspaper that week about GIs finding bodies stacked in piles in big brick buildings that were really ovens. She'd had nightmares from just reading about it. She crumpled the picture of the toaster into a tight ball and tossed it, hard, into a trash can by the back door. She picked up the Chef Boyardee box and busied herself reading the directions so that her brain would fill up with something else, something easy. The chugging opening bars of Chattanooga Choo Choo came out of the radio, and without thinking about it, Suze started shaking the box to the rhythm. Shoosh pa, shoosh pa, shoosh pa. Spaghetti made a pretty good train sound. She stood up, keeping the box in motion, and began to march around the kitchen in time to the toe-tapping music. Shoosh pa, shoosh pa. And then, in mid-song, the music stopped abruptly, replaced by the voice of Bob Parton, the disc jockey, sounding excited. "The Germans have surrendered," he said. "The war in Europe is over. President Truman announced this morning that General Eisenhower—" Suze stared at the radio in shock for a minute, then began shaking the box of spaghetti furiously like a New Year's Eve noisemaker. She jumped up and down so hard that a paper Toto dog, only partially cut out, fluttered off the table and glided across the linoleum. Suze paid no attention. It's over, Suze half sung, half shouted. It's over, it's over, it's over! She jumped to Dewey's side of the table, and without thinking about it, grabbed her arm and pulled her into the celebration. They danced around the tiny kitchen, arms linked together, both shouting, "It's over!" to the cacophony of the box of spaghetti, until the radio began to blare out the Star-Spangled Banner. Suze dropped Dewey's arm and put her hand over her heart automatically, the way they always did in school, and closed her eyes. When the anthem was over, she was standing in the kitchen again, looking at Dewey. Suddenly, everything felt awkward. "The war's over," Suze said in a normal tone of voice. "Yeah," Dewey said. "I'm glad." She looked around for a second, then sat down. Suze felt a little out of breath, but she didn't feel excited anymore. Not the same way. The radio droned on and on about generals and treaties and terms, and Suze turned the volume down, picked the Toto dog up off the floor, and sat back at the table. She fiddled with her scissors. "I bet there'll be a lot of parties tonight," she said after a minute. "Maybe my dad will even come home early. He can stop working for one night. It's the end of the war, after all." "Maybe," Dewey said. "I guess they'll have to keep making the gadget, though, because of Japan. That war isn't over." "Oh, I forgot about that." "Yeah, but I bet the army hasn't. On the other hand," Dewey said, smiling, "now maybe Papa can come home from Washington and stop looking for a Nazi gadget." Suze stared across the table. "The Nazis have a gadget?" "Probably not, or the war wouldn't be over," Dewey said, shaking her head. "But Papa said before the war, scientists all over the world talk to each other all the time, so the ones that turned into Nazis could have known the same stuff." "How do you know about that?" Suze glared suspiciously at Dewey. "It would be top secret." "I don't know much, just what Papa said in his letter." "Oh, right, like the censors would let something like that get through," Suze said scornfully. Dewey was just trying to sound big. "It was in code." "Code? Like a spy?" Suze snorted. Now she was sure Dewey was full of baloney. "It's not like he's passing on war secrets or anything," Dewey said quickly. "He just lets me know what he's doing." Dewey got up and went back to the bedroom. She returned a minute later with a flimsy piece of paper and spread it out on the table. It had been folded and refolded so many times it was almost in pieces. See, Papa's letters are always in code, ever since I was little. He says it exercises my brain. When I was in first grade, it was mostly rebuses. You know, the puzzles where the pictures sound like words. Suze nodded impatiently. Then later, it was mostly numbers, like, Dewey wrinkled up her forehead, like 4523 525 would be Dewey, alphabet code. That's an easy one. Most of them were trickier. Suze looked down at the letter. This is just words. Well, yeah, like Papa's gonna send a number code by the censors? That would just make them pay attention. I guess so. Suze read the letter and smirked. Code? What a bunch of bushwa. This was just boring old letter. There's no secret in here. Sure there is. Look. Dewey pointed to a line. He said he saw Casablanca with Uncle T, but Papa doesn't go to the movies, and I don't have any uncles, so it must be a clue. About what? Well, that one's not really code. It's just Spanish. Suze muttered under her breath. Casablanca. Casa. Blanca. House. White House. White House? You think your dad went to the White House? Dewey nodded. With Uncle T, who has to be Truman. That was pretty good, even for baloney. But what about the Nazis? There's nothing at all about Nazis in any language, Suze said. Let her try to explain that. Yeah, there is. See here where he calls me a little munchkin? Papa never calls me cute names, so that's gotta be code too. Suze thought for a minute. What would munchkins have to do with Nazis? Well, Oz, Nazi, they both had Z's. Was that it? Because Oz sounds kind of like Nazi, she said. The Z's? Dewey raised her eyebrows in surprise, so high that Suze could see them above her glasses. Wow, that's good. I hadn't thought about that at all. She looked down at the paper. Wow, she said again. Suze felt oddly pleased. So what did you think it meant? Munich, Dewey replied. Munchkin, Munich. That made sense too. Suze wished her father would write secret notes. This was kind of fun. What about the rest? Dewey shrugged. I figure a pocket knife with that many blades is a useful gadget, right? But since Papa doesn't have a knife like that, and no one can find another, it means Nazi scientists aren't building a gadget, Dewey finished. I told you. Suze whistled through her teeth. That's really clever. Papa's good at puzzles, Dewey nodded. She looked down at the letter, then up at Suze. You won't tell anyone, will you? I don't want Papa to get in trouble, she said seriously. Nope, my lips are sealed, Suze said. Thanks. Dewey gave the butter knife a hard twist, and the two halves of the duck split open with a pop and rattled onto the tablecloth. She pulled the spring out and looked at it in triumph. Finally. Suze stared at the letter and the demolished duck. It's a good thing you Kerrigans are on our side, she said after a minute, and went over to light the stove and boil water for spaghetti. Chapter 18, May 26th, Heroic Figures. The afternoon everything changed started out pretty ordinary. Suze sat on the couch in the living room, a stack of comic books on one side of her, and the big yellow bowl full of buttered popcorn on the other. A green bottle of Coke balanced out the wooden arm of the couch. What are those about anyway? Dewey asked from the chair across the room. She'd been reading a book about geometry. Suze wasn't sure why, since school was almost over for the summer, but she'd come to the end of it. A cereal bowl of popcorn was wedged between her leg and the side of the chair. What about? Your comic books. What kind of stories do they have? Just the usual, Suze said, without taking her eyes off Wonder Woman, who's about to lasso a very evil-looking Jap. I don't know what that means. You've never read a comic book? Dewey shook her head. Come on, you've never read a comic book? Suze asked again. That was unbelievable. How could anybody, even Dewey, grow up in America and never read a comic book? It was just the sort of thing that spies got trapped by. Who is Clark Kent? And a Nazi wouldn't know, would he? Classics Illustrated, Treasure Island, once, Dewey said sadly. Then my Nana took it away. She said they'd rot my brain and give me nightmares. She looked wistfully at the pile at Suze's side. Says her. Treasure Island? Suze shook her head. That's pretty tame. Even these, she patted the top of the stack, even these won't keep you up at night. They're just adventures, superheroes with special powers. Like what? Dewey moved the bowl of popcorn to her lap and slid forward to the edge of the chair. Well, like when Captain Marvel says Shazam, he turns from an ordinary guy into, she looked at the comic on the top of the stack, the world's mightiest mortal. Captain America got shot up with some sort of secret army serum, and Superman's super because he came from another planet. I'm not sure about Captain Midnight, but he can do nifty stuff too. There are a lot of captains, Dewey said. Are all the heroes men? Suze nodded. All the captains, yeah, and most of the others too. But there's Wonder Woman, and Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and Brenda Starr, but she's boring because she's just a reporter. Mostly she just gets rescued, or kissed. Suze made a face. I like Captain Marvel and Superman best. Superman can melt steel just by staring at it the right way. That would be kind of useful, Dewey said. Yeah. Suze crammed a handful of popcorn into her mouth and wiped her hand on her pants leg. You want to read a couple? She said as she chewed. Really? Sure. Suze swallowed and took a drink of Coke. I've read all these a bunch already. Just don't wreck 'em, okay? Dewey gave her a funny look, and Suze realized that had been silly. Dewey was about the neatest person she'd ever met. She even used a bookmark when she was done reading, instead of turning down the corner of the page like everyone in her family. She thumbed through the top of the stack and pulled out the third one down, which had a man in a red cloak and tights standing with his foot on a Nazi's head. Here, start with Captain Marvel. This one's pretty good. She tossed the comic across the coffee table, spine first, so it sailed into Dewey's lap. It looks swell, said Dewey. She ate a single piece of popcorn and settled back into the armchair with a contented smile. Suze put the stack of comics on the coffee table and went into the kitchen, where she'd been working before she decided to take a break and read. The table was covered with cut-out pieces from shiny magazines, people mostly, and some cars and a tank. A Pyrex baking pan corralled an army of seemingly random objects: 5 bottle caps, a chip of green-painted wood, a marble, the cardboard top off a milk bottle, a red rubber ball, and a wax paper square with a small mound of reddish dirt. Her first collage, Life in Berkeley, had turned out pretty okay. She'd glued everything to a big piece of cardboard, the side of a carton of cereal from the PX. This one was going to be the hill, so she'd cut out a lot of soldiers. Magazines were good for soldiers, and army green trucks and buildings, because just about every ad was about being patriotic in the war, so that was useful. It was harder to find pictures dressed like people on the hill. Almost everyone in magazines looked like they were on their way to a party. Most of the women had dresses and lots of makeup, and didn't look like anybody she knew in real life. She'd spent a week walking around the hill trying to figure out what she'd wanted to show, and another couple of weeks begging old magazines from people and cutting out enough pictures. She'd gotten pretty excited the night she found a water tower in an ad, and spent most of another morning cutting carefully around the strands of a black and white barbed wire fence. Suze started laying out pictures on the kitchen table, layering them so it looked like trees behind buildings behind people. On the very top, she put some of the objects from the Pyrex pan: a Coke bottle cap near the building that looked like the PX, the red rubber ball on top of some playground swings. She moved the pictures and the objects around for almost an hour, but no matter where she put them, they didn't quite make what she could see in her head. Everything was too flat. She wanted the people to be at the front, not just a paper's thickness away from the background, but sticking out from it. She tried taping a marble to the back of a soldier, but it only made his middle bulge. His head and feet drooped down as if he'd been draped across a tiny, invisible barrel. She cut a strip from a piece of shirt cardboard, taped it down the soldier's back, then taped the marble to that. He was stiffer, but teetered, head foot, like an army seesaw. Suze sighed, put the soldier down onto the oilcloth, and went to the bathroom. When she came back, Dewey was standing next to the sink, a juice glass of water in her hand. Are Billy Batson and Captain Marvel the same person? She asked. Yeah, Billy Batson's just his secret identity. But, Dewey frowned, but Billy's just a kid, and Captain Marvel's a grown man. How can... Shazam, Suze said confidently. Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, Mercury. The ancient wizard gives him all those guys' powers when he says the word. She smiled. She didn't get to explain much to Dewey, and it felt kind of good. When it came to comic books, Suze knew her onions. Oh, Dewey said. Well, I guess it works. She turned to go back into the living room, but stopped as she passed the table and looked at the teetering soldier. Why'd you do that? Suze followed her gaze. The marble? Yeah. I want that guy to stick out, but it didn't really work. Stick out how? Like this. Suze picked up the soldier and held it about an inch away from one of the buildings. I want it to look like he's standing in front of the PX, not just pasted onto it. Like in the shoebox dioramas we made for school, except these people are too big for a shoebox. Dewey nodded, then scrunched up her face, thinking. What about a bigger box, from a department store? Suze looked at the tabletop. That would work, except, she said, sighing, there isn't a department store for like 200 miles. Dewey nodded and looked around the kitchen. A drawer, then, she said. What? A drawer. Dewey put Captain Marvel down and pulled out the shallow silverware drawer to the left of the sink. See? It's about 2 inches deep, so you could paste some stuff to the bottom, and some on the sides. When you were done, you could probably even hang it on the wall like a frame. Yeah, Suze said slowly. Yeah, that might work. She stepped over to the counter and looked at the drawer for a long minute before she sighed again and pushed it back in with a thunk. What? Even my mom would probably notice the silverware drawer was missing, Suze said, or the desk drawer, or any other drawer. She slumped against the counter. It's a good idea, though. You just need one that nobody's using. Suze looked around the small, cluttered apartment. Around here? Fat chance. Not here, Dewey said, sounding like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The dump. There are drawers at the dump? There's just about everything at the dump. Drawers? Probably. There's usually a busted up desk or two. You should check it out. Dewey picked up Captain Marvel and turned to go. Suze bit her lip. She knew there was a dump, of course, but she didn't know exactly where it was or how it worked, and she didn't want to admit that. Maybe if she went for a walk, she could find it? Not likely, since she hadn't stumbled across it in 2 years of wandering. Where exactly is the dump? She asked, as casually as she could. You've never been to the dump? Dewey made it sound as if she'd never eaten cheese. You've never read comics, Suze countered. Dewey shrugged. True. She held up Captain Marvel. So, we'll trade. Let me finish this one, then I'll take you if you want. I'm always up for a trip to the dump. It's about my favorite place on the hill, and I haven't been this week. Sure, I guess so. Suze's voice came out sounding as if she was doing Dewey a big favor by going, which wasn't what she'd meant exactly, but Dewey didn't seem to notice. By the time Suze had found her shoes, one under her bed and one under the dresser, Dewey had replaced Captain Marvel on top of the stack and was waiting by the back door. They walked to the bottom of the stairs. Suze turned right and was 5 feet down the dirt road when Dewey said, Hold up a sec. She ducked under the angle of the stairs and came out a few seconds later, pulling the handle of her red wagon. Suze looked at it and frowned. Walking with Dewey was one thing. Everyone knew she was staying with the Gordons, and nobody had made too big of a deal. It was kind of old news. But a little red wagon? Suze was almost 12. Do we have to take that? No, Dewey said, but it takes about 20 minutes to walk to the dump, and it's kind of hot today. I wouldn't want to carry a wooden drawer all the way back. She looked at Suze, looked back at the wagon, and waited. Suze was pretty strong, but she was already starting to sweat a little, just standing there in the sun. Maybe Dewey had a point. Okay, let's take it, she said after a minute. Do you want me to pull? You can have the way back when it's full, Dewey said. Deal, as long as you don't want to bring back an anvil or something. Promise, said Dewey. Alright, so that is where we're going to stop for today. So I am loving seeing Suze and Dewey's friendship kind of evolve. They started out hating each other, then they got to a point where they're kind of like okay with each other, and now it seems like they're almost becoming friends. So we're getting closer. We've got, still a ways to go in this book. Make sure that you check out tomorrow's video, stay tuned, and we will keep reading. Alright, bye guys.